Picture the open ocean at midnight. It's this incredibly dynamic, thrilling frontier, right? We tend to think of the high seas as this wild, untamed expanse, a place where massive steel behemoths just roam completely free. But behind those crashing waves and that beautifully cinematic image of a ship cutting through the fog, there's actually an ingenious, incredibly strict legal code silently governing every single maneuver. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unravel the high-stakes legal thriller that is maritime collision law. So what actually happens when titans of the sea collide? Imagine the chaotic aftermath of massive vessels crashing in the dead of night. Thousands of tons of steel grinding together, cargo spilling everywhere, millions of dollars just evaporating in a split second. It looks like total anarchy. But what happens next? It isn't chaos at all. It's actually a meticulously choreographed legal process. You see, every single turn of the wheel, every blast of a horn, and every flashing light on the water is dictated by an international set of rules perfectly designed to prevent this exact nightmare.
Okay, let's dive straight into this tactical playbook. Formed back in 1972 by the International Maritime Organization, these collision regulations act as the ultimate survival manual for the oceans. From general conduct to steering and sailing, all the way to lights, shapes, and sound signals, this is quite literally the definitive guide to not crashing.
Now, part B of these regulations, that is where the kinetic action really happens. When massive ships are inside of each other, they don't just guess who goes first. It's a high-stakes, elegant dance. Rule 6 tells you to maintain a safe speed at all times. Rule 12, if the wind is at your back, you give way. Rule 13 makes it clear that the overtaking vessel always keeps out of the way. And Rule 14 is absolutely crucial. If two ships are speeding head-on, both instinctively alter their course to starboard. This allows them to glide elegantly past each other, portside to portside. But, every strict code has its insiders, right? Take a look at Rule 10, which governs traffic separation schemes. These are basically the invisible multi-lane highways of the sea, and almost everyone has to follow these lanes perfectly. But here's a really fascinating secret. Maintenance ships and cable-laying vessels, they actually get a free pass on full compliance with these specific traffic rules. They're kind of the untouchables of the sea lanes, allowed to do their vital work while the rest of the world's traffic just navigates right around them. So what happens when this intricate code gets broken? Well, this is the inciting incident of our maritime thriller. When a collision occurs, it gives rise to what the law calls a tort of negligence. And to win a massive payout, a plaintiff can't just point fingers. They have to prove three very distinct things to the court. First, that the other ship owed them a duty of care. Second, that there was a clear breach of that duty. And third, that the breach directly caused the damage. Now, what's really interesting here is a plot twist that sounds almost like a ghost story. I mean, you would think a collision requires, actually colliding, right? But as the pivotal 1994 Carnival case proved, a vessel can cause severe damage by its negligence without any actual contact whatsoever. If your ship's reckless maneuvering forces another ship to run aground just to avoid hitting you, you are legally on the hook, even if your paint job's never touched. But wait, the defending ship has a cinematic defense mechanism of its own. It's called the doctrine of alternative danger, or as it's beautifully known in maritime law, the agony of the moment. Picture this. A shipmaster is on the bridge. Alarms are blaring. Danger is everywhere. They are thrust into sudden, heart-pounding peril entirely due to another ship's negligence. They have to make a split-second, life-or-death decision, and it fails. Guess what? The law forgives them, because they literally had no time to calmly calculate an alternative. That original negligent ship still bears all the massive financial losses. Okay, let's step back from the adrenaline for a moment and look calmly at the financial fallout. Historically, maritime common law was remarkably, almost brutally blunt. If two ships crashed, it didn't matter if one was acting like a total maniac, while the other just made a tiny navigational error. The damages were simply chopped right down the middle. 50% fault to ship A and 50% to ship B. No nuance at all, just a rigid, uncompromising halving of the bill. And as you might guess, this blunt system created a totally bizarre, almost comical legal loophole called the both-to-blame anomaly. Imagine you own cargo on a ship that crashes. You try to sue the ship carrying your goods, but they have a defense written right into your contract. So you sue the other ship involved in the crash instead. Well, that non-carrying ship then turns around and bills your carrying ship for 50% of the damages, even if they were only 1% at fault. To stop this endless, crazy loop, ship owners actually had to invent a defensive clause in their contracts just to force the shipper to reimburse them. A truly unbelievable legal headache. Thankfully, the world eventually realized this 50-50 split was absolute madness. The major turning point was the year 1910 at the Brussels Collision Convention. Here, the international community finally agreed that damages should be paid in proportion to actual fault. So if you're 80% to blame, you pay 80% of the bill. Makes sense, right? The UK quickly enacted this into law in 1911. But in a dramatic twist of international relations, the United States famously refused to ratify the 1910 Collision Convention, walking its own unique path in maritime law for decades. So we figured out who is to blame. But as the smoke clears and the sirens finally fade, our narrative shifts from high seas drama to the cold, hard forensic calculation of damages. How much does a negligent shipowner actually have to pay? The overarching goal of the law is simple in theory: put the injured party back in the exact financial position they were in before the tort occurred. But as you'll see, the reality of calculating that is incredibly complex. To understand how much a guilty ship actually pays, we have to look at the evolution of remoteness, meaning how far down the chain of disaster are you realistically responsible for. Back in 1921, the Repulmus case stated you only pay for direct physical losses. Pure economic chain reactions, those simply weren't covered. But fast forward to 1961, and the famous Wagon Mound case completely overruled that old standard. Today, the test is reasonable foreseeability. A plaintiff can recover all damages that are reasonably foreseeable consequences of the negligence, even if they aren't the immediate direct physical result. Sandwiched right between those eras is the tragicomic story of the Liesbosch dredger in 1933. So a ship called the Edison negligently dragged the Liesbosch from its moorings out into the open sea, where it was completely lost. Now, the Liesbosch owners were too financially unstable to buy a new dredger, so they had to rent an incredibly expensive replacement just to avoid massive contract penalties. They sued for those rental costs. The court's verdict? Denied. The court ruled the rental costs were a result of the claimant's own pre-existing financial instability, not the Edison's negligence. Basically, you don't get extra money just because you're broke. This brings us to a cinematic crossroads, the two distinct post-collision outcomes. The way forensic accountants and the courts handle your payout depends entirely on one big factor. Is your ship resting quietly at the bottom of the ocean, or is it limping back to port with a massive hole in its hull? Let's take a look at how the math changes for a total loss versus severe damage. If your ship is completely lost, the defendant absolutely does not owe you a shiny, brand new vessel. That would actually leave you better off than you started. Instead, you get the market value of the ship at the exact time it sank. But because market value is notoriously hard to prove for massive, highly specialized vessels, accountants will often calculate its value as a going concern. This means they take the original cost of the ship and then subtract its depreciated value over time. So the crucial point is, what happens if the ship is damaged but not totally lost? Enter the doctrine of restitutio in integrum. You get the funds to act reasonably and repair the ship, restoring you to your previous financial state. And, amazingly enough, if repairing the ship accidentally increases its overall value, the courts actually accept that. You can also recover consequential losses, things like the chartered freight or business profits you missed out on while your ship was sitting in the dry dock. Provided, of course, those lost profits are a direct consequence and aren't just wildly speculative. Now, with all this talk of torts, market values, and depreciating assets, it's pretty easy to wonder, who is actually policing the oceans? Are these 38 collision rules just polite maritime suggestions, a gentleman's agreement among sailors? Or is there a real, sharp-toothed threat enforcing this whole complex web of liability? Make no mistake, the threat is very, very real. There is a severe dual threat for breaching these regulations, just to ensure strict compliance. First, breaking the rules of the road at sea is a literal criminal offense, meaning shipmasters can and absolutely will face prosecution. Second, if you break a regulation and it leads to a crash, that breach serves as practically unbeatable evidence of negligent navigation in a civil case. You are essentially handing the victim the exact ammunition they need to drain your bank account in court. The ocean might look wild and untamed, but beneath the surface of the waves lies this brilliant, ironclad framework of order. From split-second cinematic maneuvers in the agony of the moment to century-old debates over forensic accounting, every single movement on the water is bound by law. So the next time you look out at the horizon and see a massive freighter slipping quietly through the mist, ask yourself, what invisible rules do you see steering the giants of the sea? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity anchored.